Hey, so let me give a brief introduction about the story we're about to start today. A woman spends 3 weeks planning a surprise birthday dinner for her friend. She picks the restaurant her friend mentioned once in passing months earlier. She coordinates with the friend's other friends. She picks up the cake herself because the bakery her friend likes doesn't deliver. Her own birthday comes 2 months later. Her friends text happy birthday at 11:47 p.m. That's it. She tells herself that's not a big deal. One missed effort doesn't mean anything, right? But when she finally looks back at the whole relationship instead of just that one night, she realizes the birthday wasn't the problem, it was the pattern. And once she sees the pattern, she can't unsee it. If you've ever found yourself doing the math on a relationship, counting who reaches out first, who remembers, who shows up, stay with me on this story. Today we're talking about one-sided relationships, how to actually spot them in friendships, in family, and in romantic relationships before they quietly cost you years. Hey, 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 welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. This channel is for honest conversations about becoming the woman you keep promising yourself you'll become. And today's topic is one I think almost everyone watching has lived through in some form, even if they've never named it out loud. Here's what we're covering for today. First, I'm going to walk you through the full story behind that birthday, what it actually revealed once it was looked at as a pattern and just one moment. Secondly, we'll talk about why one sided relationships are so hard to notice from the inside, even when the signs are right in front of us. And thirdly, I'll walk you through a clear framework, specific signs to watch for across friendships, family, and romantic relationships, so you can spot this pattern early instead of years into it. Get comfortable, let's get into the story. Hey, let's back up and look at the whole picture, not just the birthday. This friendship had been going on for years. They had met in their 20s, the kind of friendship that starts fast and feels instantly comfortable. Late night phone calls, inside jokes, the sense of having found someone who got you. In the beginning, it genuinely felt mutual. It didn't start one sided. It became that way slowly in a thousand small moments that were each too small to question on their own. Here is what it looked like in practice. By the time she finally paid attention, she was the one who texted first, almost every single time, not occasionally, almost always. If she stopped initiating for a week or two just to see what would happen, the silence would stretch on indefinitely. Her friend wasn't busy avoiding her. She simply wasn't thinking of her unless she was right in front of her. When something had happened in her own life, she'd usually wait a day or two before mentioning it, because some part of her already knew the conversation would somehow circle back to her friend's most recent hard thing, often within minutes. Her friend probably didn't do this on purpose. She likely never noticed the pattern because nobody had ever made her notice it. When something had happened in the friend's life, on the other hand, she'd hear about it in the same day, sometimes within the hour, and she'd drop whatever she was doing to be available. That felt natural at the time. That's just what good friends do, right? It took embarrassingly long to notice that the same instinct never seemed to travel in the other direction. And then there was the birthday. The point of that story was never that a single forgotten happy birthday makes someone had a bad friend. One off night doesn't define a relationship. Yeah, the point is what happened when she finally looked at the night next to every other night that came before it. The effort poured into her friend's birthday wasn't an isolated event. It was simply the most recent example of years of the same lopsided pattern. She was always the one remembering, planning, showing up, adjusting. Her friend was always the one being remembered, planned for, shown up for. For a long time, she didn't see this clearly because she was the one inside the relationship, doing all the giving. When you are the one always giving, it's strangely hard to notice you're giving more than you're receiving because you're so busy giving, you don't have the distance to count. The moment it finally became clear wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, lying awake one night, replaying the dinner she had on the birthday she planned, the cake she picked up herself, the friends she'd coordinated, and then thinking about her own birthday and the single text at 11:47 p.m. and finally asking the question she'd been avoiding for years. Would her friend have done any of this for her? She already knew the answer, she just hadn't let herself ask the questions out loud before. Let's talk about why one-sided relationship are some of the hardest patterns to spot while you're living inside them. Even when looking back, the signs feel almost embarrassingly obvious. The first reason is simple. We tend to measure relationships by our own efforts, not by the balance between two people's efforts. If you're someone who naturally shows up, remembers details, initiates plans, that's just who you are. You're not doing it as a transaction, expecting an equal return on a specific timeline, which is exactly what makes it so easy for someone else to quietly stop matching that effort without you noticing right away. You're not counting, you're just being yourself. The second reason is that one sided relationships rarely announce themselves all at once. They erode gradually, the same way a coastline erodes, not in one dramatic event, but in years of small waves you don't notice individually. One missed birthday doesn't mean anything. One unreturned text doesn't mean anything. It's only when you zoom out the way the woman in our story finally did and look at the cumulative pattern across years instead of individual moments that the shape of it becomes visible. The third reason, and I think this is the one that applies most to women specifically, is that we are often taught that being the giver in a relationship is a virtue, regardless of whether it's reciprocated. Being low maintenance, being understanding, being the one who doesn't keep score, those traits get praised constantly. Yeah. Which makes it very hard to admit, even to yourself, that you've started keeping score because some part of you worries that noticing the imbalance makes you petty or needy or too much instead of just accurate. I want to be really clear about something here. The same way I was in the boundaries video, noticing an imbalance is not the same thing as keeping score in a punishing way. There's a difference between obsessively tallying every text and simply being honest with yourself about a pattern that's repeated for years. One is anxiety, the other is clarity. And clarity, even when it's uncomfortable, is always worth having. This shows up in family relationships too. Often even more invisibly than in friendships, because family relationships come with an extra layer of obligation. We are taught that family effort isn't supposed to be reciprocal. You just show up because that's what family does. So when one sibling or one parent consistently receives more accommodation than they give, it can take decades to even register as imbalance because the script says you're not supposed to be counting in the first place. And in romantic relationships, the same pattern shows up wearing yet another disguise, usually the disguise of that's just how he is, or she's just not an emotional, expressive person. We make endless exceptions for the lack of reciprocity in romantic relationships, specifically because love itself gets confused with sacrifice. We start believing that the amount we give is proof of how much we love someone, instead of asking whether the relationship is actually giving anything back. Let's talk about what this actually costs you over time because I don't think we calculate this honestly very often. It's not just the obvious cost, the energy spent planning, remembering, showing up. It's something quieter and more corrosive. A slow erosion of your own sense of what you want in a relationship. When you spend years being the one who gives more, some part of you starts to internalize that this is simply your role, not because anyone told you that explicitly, but because the pattern repeats over enough that it starts to feel like the natural order of things rather than something that could be different. There's also a strange, specific kind of loneliness that comes from a one sided relationship, arguably lonelier than having no relationship at all. You're emotionally present for someone who isn't equally present for you. You have a person in your life, technically, but you don't actually have the experience of being known and shown up for in return. That particular kind of loneliness is sneaky because from the outside, it looks like you have a full connected life. From the inside, it can feel strangely hollow. And here's the part that I think matters most. Every year you spend in a relationship like this is a year you are not spending building or deepening a relationship that actually reciprocates. Time and emotional energy are not infinite. Every ounce you pour into a one sided dynamic is an ounce that isn't going toward a friendship, a family relationship, or a romantic partnership that would actually meet you halfway. I am not saying this to scare you into ending every relationship that has ever felt unbalanced for a season. Relationships go through real, normal seasons of imbalance, especially during illness, grief, new parenthood, or crisis. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a consistent long term pattern, the kind that doesn't shift even when life circumstances change, the kind that is simply the baseline of how the relationship has always worked. So, how do you actually identify this clearly instead of just feeling a vague unease you can't quite name? Here are the questions I now recommend across all the three types of relationships: friendships, family, and romantic. Question one: who initiates consistently over time? Not just once. Track it honestly over a month or two. If you stop reaching out entirely, would the relationship continue on its own or would it quietly go silent? The answer tells you almost everything. Question 2: does effort flow in both directions or only one? Think about birthdays, hard days, celebrations, crises, when something happens in your life, does this person show up the way you show up for them? Not identically. People express care differently, but is there real, consistent effort moving in your direction too? Question 3. Do conversations make room for you or only for them? Notice how often a conversation about your life gets redirected back to theirs within minutes. Occasional redirection is normal. We all do this sometimes. Constant redirection, where your updates are treated as a brief pause before returning to their main storyline, is a pattern worth naming. Question 4. If you brought this up honestly, what will happen? This is maybe the most revealing questions of all. Imagine calmly telling this person, I've noticed I'm usually the one reaching out first. Do you trust they'll actually hear that and adjust? Or does some part of you already know it will be met with defensiveness, dismissal, or guilt tripping rather than genuine reflection? Your honest answer to that question tells you a lot about whether this relationship is capable of becoming balanced or whether the imbalance is simply how it's always going to be. It's worth knowing how the story from earlier actually played out because it matters. The woman did eventually bring it up with her friend, calmly, without ambushing her, the same way we talked about in the boundaries video. Her friend's response told her everything she needed to know. She didn't get defensive. She got quiet and a little sad and admitted she'd never really thought about it because she'd never had to. That conversation didn't fix everything overnight, but it shifted something. She started initiating more, not perfectly, not symmetrically, but enough that the relationship started to feel mutual again instead of something being kept alive by one person alone. Not every story ends that way. Sometimes the honest conversation reveals that the other person isn't willing or able to meet you halfway. And that's painful information too, but it's information you need because it lets you make a real choice instead of an unconscious one. So, here's what I want you to remember from today: a relationship that asks you to do all the remembering, all the reaching out, all the showing up without ever asking the same of itself isn't love in its purest form. It's an imbalance wearing love's clothing. And you deserve to notice the difference. You're allowed to want a friendship, a family relationship, a romantic relationship that gives back even a fraction of what you give. Wanting that isn't needy. It isn't keeping score in a petty way. It's simply wanting to be in a relationship that's actually a relationship. Two people both showing up instead of one person carrying the whole thing alone. If this video made you think of something specific, a friend, a family member, maybe even a partner, I want to hear about it gently in the comments. You don't have to name names, just tell me what's the pattern you've noticed once you finally looked at the whole relationship instead of just one moment. If this resonated, hit subscribe and turn on notifications because next week video is a natural step after this one. How to actually have that hard conversation once you've spotted the imbalance without it turning into a fight. And if you know someone who is quietly carrying a relationship like this alone, send this to them today. Sometimes just having the pattern named out loud is the first step towards something changing. I'll see you in the next video.